Alright, the 1980s. It's going to be so much quicker and easier than the 70s because the 80s only had one idea: an excess of excess. To understand 80s fashion, we have to look at the world, of course, and the 80s world was dominated by two people: Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States, and Margaret Thatcher, the first female Prime Minister of Great Britain. Now, neither of these people were evil people by any means, but they were both rather right-wing. They were both capitalists, and because of these two, we came closer to nuclear war than we had since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the early 1960s. Take a look at this Time magazine cover. Who has the bomb? The nuclear threat is spreading. It was scary. In Britain, under Thatcher, who was a capitalist and privatized everything, there was mass unemployment, 3 million jobless and worse to come. Here are some British people lining up to collect their welfare check, their dole. It was miserable. I should know, I was there. Under Reagan, there was something called Reaganomics. This was sort of a trickle-down economy, whereby the rich got richer and the poor didn't. This was the time of the Yuppie. You know about Yuppies, right? Young urban professionals. These were the rich. These were the Wall Street types. Everything in the 80s was about money. If you had it, you wanted more. If you didn't, you wanted more. And you were obsessed with the people who did have it. So keep all this in mind when we go and look at fashion. Greed is good. That was the catchphrase of the 80s. It came from a character that Michael Douglas here played in a movie called Wall Street. He played a ruthless Wall Street banker who said that greed is good. And in the 80s, it seemed to be true. Fashion-wise, the era is easy. For no matter which demographic we're looking at, the overarching story is the same: excess. In the 80s, you could not have too many sequins. You could not wear too much lace. You couldn't have too many feathers. Oh, look, there's Cher again. We can always count on her. You could not wear too much makeup, especially if you were a boy. You couldn't have too many accessories. Your clothing could not be too big. If you were getting married in the era, your train could not be too long, and no matter who or where you were, your hair could never be too big. Mass unemployment in Britain, a trickle-down economy in the US, and a fluctuating financial climate throughout the world saw a growing division between the rich and the poor, those haves and have-nots, that truly echoed the Great Depression. So there was an obsession with money in the 80s that was reflected at every level of the economic spectrum. Let's look at the 1980s body ideal. There she is. Tall, Amazonian, broad shoulders, long legs, toned abs, trimmed hips. Strong and tall and slender. She'd need to be, because of all of the crap that she would have to wear. So much bulk, so much color. You would really, ideally, need a tall Amazonian body to accommodate everything that was going on in the 80s. Did anyone have this body? Well, sure they did. Brooke Shields had this body. Do you know who else had this body? Princess Diana had this body. Look at the beauty ideal of the 80s. Material girls and boys. Hey, it's no accident that Material Girl by Madonna was a hit in a decade obsessed with money and wealth. Okay, Sarah, are you ready for the 80s? Thick eyebrows, an awful lot of colour on the lids, a lot of neon pulled through from the New Wave era, a lot of eyeliner, eyelashes, more eyelashes, false eyelashes, even more false eyelashes, a lot of blush. You couldn't have too much bright makeup in the 80s. And a lot of colour on the lip. Let's give her some 1980s hair. And because it's the era of excess, we have to give her a lot of jewellery as well. There we go. And more jewellery and more jewellery. Come on. You cannot have enough accessories in the 80s. And voila, there's our own Material Girl, Madonna. And you can see that this really is the ideal. But boys had it too. Boy George, for example. Some boys embraced makeup. Let's look at the 80s palette. Brace yourselves. Maybe you should put some dark glasses on because this palette was bright. Neons and primaries. Oh my God, this was a bright decade. Fuchsia, my worst color ever, because of the 80s, was the most popular. Color was everywhere. You couldn't get enough of it. Why? Because it's the decade of excess. And that includes an excess of color. No wonder the United Colors of Benetton was one of the most popular advertising campaigns, and believe it or not, Benetton was one of the hottest names in the 80s too, because of color. In terms of silhouette, the bigger the better. Oversize was the big silhouette story of the 80s. Take a look at all of this. Oh my God, it's so large. But so was hair. So were boom boxes. Everything was big. We were obsessed with the rich, remember? And we loved watching the rich on TV, even if we weren't rich ourselves. Shows like Dallas about rich oil barons, Knots Landing about other rich glamorous folk. I can't remember what the story of Knots Landing was. Falcon Crest. All of these are evening soap operas about rich and glamorous families. And Dynasty, the best one of all, the most glamorous, and the show that genuinely had the biggest fashion impact, due to its incredibly glamorous cast. Which takes us beautifully to our first style icon of the 80s, star of Dynasty, Joan Collins. She played the evil Alexis Carrington. Sort of a super bitch, I suppose you'd call her. Glamorous, evil, conniving. Incredibly glamorous, and this really is how mainstream women wanted to look. There is Joan Collins as Alexis Carrington, giving someone an evil stare. Her look was incredibly glamorous, very evocative of the 40s. In the 80s, you're going to see a 40s revival and a 60s revival, both happening at the same time. The 60s revival amongst the young with the revival of the miniskirt, but then across the board, 40s glamour. Why? Because it evoked wealth and it was all about the rich. Oh, There she is again. Take a look at her eye makeup, though. It's very, very colourful. Very 80s. But look, what's going on here? Diamonds and sequins and fuchsia eye makeup. And an awful lot of fur. A great quote from Joan Collins here. The problem with beauty is that it's like being born rich and getting poorer. In other words, if you're born beautiful, the older you get, the less beautiful you become. Power dressing. Oh, that was a buzzword, a buzz phrase of the 80s. Basically, power dressing jumped on the 1970s pantsuit, women's liberation look, and empowered it. This was women crashing through the glass ceiling with big, strong, masculine suits, padded shoulders that of course echoed the 1940s. So this was tied in with the 40s revival. Honestly, clothing could not get more big and more powerful. Greed is good, and you are getting in there in the man's world in Wall Street. Take a look at this. Sort of ridiculous, but this seemed normal at the time, believe me. These outfits are a little bit extreme, but there was a designer who really did understand how to make power dressing. Our first designer of the... Do you know who she is? She's called Donna Karan. And she really understood power dressing. She made it softer, more feminine, and wearable and workable. She was a well-known and beloved for collections where women, working women, could coordinate their outfits. Dresses that matched jackets, jackets that matched pants, everything could be mixed and matched. It's rather lovely, even by 80s standards. Donna Karan was the favorite designer of the empowered working girl of the 80s. But not everybody in the 80s was working, were they? Because of the mass unemployment in Great Britain, a huge percentage of young people were unemployed. Take a look at these kids. Wow. Meet the New Romantics. This is so much fun. New Romanticism was a musical movement and a fashion movement, and it really started here at a store called the World's End at the bottom of the King's Road in Chelsea in London. Take a look at this store. It sort of looks like an 18th century or even 17th century inn, doesn't it? Look at that enormous clock. The hands spun around backwards like you were going back in time. And this was the center of the pirate look. The pirate look. And who invented it? These two. Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren. Malcolm McLaren did the musical element, and of course Vivienne Westwood did the fashion. It was the opposite to punk rock. This is how genius these two were. Punk rock, it was dirty, it was angry, it was aggressive, it was shocking. It was a reaction to what was going on in the world. In the 70s, in the 80s, dreary mass unemployment. Did people want to dress in a way that reflected that? No! They wanted to dress in a way that stuck a finger up to Margaret Thatcher. It was about being a dandy again. It was about dressing up. Sure, I've got no money and I have to stand in line to get my welfare check, but I am going to dress up like a pirate, like a cavalier, like an outlaw. It was wonderful. And this is an image of Vivienne Westwood's pirate collection. So many different eras are being played with here, but they are all sort of 17th, 18th century, aren't they? You sort of have a bit of a bicorn hat there. Look at this jacket and then look at the sans-culotte pants. This is a band that totally embraced the pirate look. They are called Adam and the Ants. They are not wearing stage costumes. This is how kids on the streets of London actually dressed for about 5 minutes in the early 80s. The lead singer is called Adam Ant, by the way. And you'll see that these boys are wearing makeup. Boy George was another person who embraced the Vivienne Westwood World's End look. I would like you to look at the print on his top there. This print was so famous, so synonymous with this look, so ripped off. And here is another fellow, just on the streets of London. Look at his little pirate hat. Look at that print again. This was a revolution. It was beautiful. It was amazing. It was exciting. I can't tell you how much everyone loved. And this means that one of the designers of the decade, again, is Vivienne Westwood. Vivienne Westwood had so many iconic collections from the early to mid-80s that I want to run through them with you so that you will be au courant with them all. Of course, the pirate collection. Here it is, a very clear image so you can see what's going on here. And I've just realized how marvelous it is. I don't have to explain to you what people wore in the 17th and 18th centuries to then explain what Vivienne Westwood was doing here. You know this. You see? Now do you understand? I hope you understand in our penultimate lecture the importance of fashion history. After that came this. It was very strange, her buffalo collection. She drew on Peruvian and Chilean traditional attire. Chilean llama herders, things like that. It was sort of grubby and dark, but so odd. Nobody had seen anything like it. Part of the buffalo collection was the buffalo hat. There's Malcolm McLaren wearing one, and that hat's made a comeback quite recently, hasn't it? And then there was punkature. This was extremely odd. This drew on the Regency era, which you know all about. I don't have to explain that now. It drew on the Victorian era, and it also drew sort of on the 1930s. It also drew on insane asylums throughout all of these eras. It was extremely odd. She opened a store in the mid-80s called Nostalgia of Mud. Take a look at it there. It was very, very strange. I went in there a few times, and I remember it smelt of damp felt, and it was very intimidating. Here are some images from the Nostalgia of Mud era. But I want you to look at the image on the left. Bras on top. It was not Jean-Paul Gaultier who first did bras on top. It was Westwood who first did bras on top. In fact, she was the first to do everything, wasn't she? Which brings us to our style icon. Oh, wow. She's called Annabella Lwin, and she was the 15-year-old lead singer of Bow Wow Wow. Now, those of you who have seen the movie Marie Antoinette might remember the song, I Want Candy. That was by Bow Wow Wow. That version that appears in the film is by Bow Wow Wow. And there is Bow Wow Wow and Annabella in full glory and in full Westwood, all of them. She was discovered working at a dry cleaner's by a friend of Malcolm McLaren, who alerted him to the beauty of Annabella Lwin. He auditioned her. It turned out she was actually a very good singer and a really fun, charismatic person, and she became Vivienne Westwood's muse. There she is on the cover of a Bow Wow Wow album, and then, much to Malcolm McLaren's delight, The band got into trouble with this album cover in which she is semi-nude. This album cover is replicating a very famous painting, Jardin sur l'herbe by Manet. But it was terribly shocking, especially as she was so young. As I said, she was Vivienne Westwood's muse, and there she is being styled by Vivienne herself. And look at the print on Annabella's blouse there. She had this wonderful mohawk, but instead of it being like stiff and spiky, she would do her mohawk in braids and curls to make it very feminine and interesting. I loved her. I still do. And there she is again. You can see why she became a much imitated style icon, right? Everyone who knows about fashion knows about the Blitz. This is part of this whole scene. The Blitz was a nightclub in London. And I have to talk to you about the Blitz Kids. These were kids who took dressing up to new realms. They were unemployed or had low-paying jobs, and they would live for dressing up in the most outrageous, outlandish, out-of-this-world costumes, and then going to the Blitz nightclub. It was just a nightclub, but they are known as the Blitz Kids. They took dressing up and new romanticism to whole new heights. They were androgynous as well, so this was androgynous dress-up as an escape from the boredom and economic hardship of long-term unemployment or low-paying jobs, because you know what? Fashion is never an island. So one last time, and just for fun, let's do an anatomy. Let's take an androgynous figure and get him or her, I think it might turn out to be a him, ready for a night at the Blitz. Although, you know, the Blitz had a very strict dress code. If you weren't quite dressed up enough, you weren't allowed in. So let's try to get him ready. It starts with some very colourful stockings, some pirate boots, his silky sans-culotte pants, so many belts, you couldn't have enough belts thrown around your hips. Then we'll give him a Vivienne Westwood pirate blouse and a cape, and more bangles and bracelets than one could ever imagine could fit on a wrist. A scarf, and then, we've got to give him full Blitz Kid new romantic makeup. He looks a bit worried there, doesn't he? He looks worried that he won't get into the Blitz, that he won't get past the doormen. Well, he won't with hair like that. We have to give him much more interesting hair. And a pirate hat with a few feathers. I think he's good to go, but you know, he's unemployed, isn't he? He lives in some dreary bedsit. That was the name that we gave to one room that you would rent. Bed-sit, bedroom and sitting room, in the suburbs, miles from London. So let's give him his Walkman, because everybody had to have a Walkman, so he could listen to Duran Duran as he waits at the bus stop. Oh, bless him. I don't know why I'm making fun of this character we've created. That was me every Saturday night in the early 80s, believe me. Let's give him some friends to make sure he gets in. Let's give him Adam and the Ants. Now he is sure to get into the Blitz. MTV launched in the 80s, and I cannot tell you the impact of MTV. Prior to MTV music television, people could see pictures of their favorite bands or new musical artists in music magazines or on the cover of albums, but you can't really get the effect. MTV changed all of that. It meant that in every home in America, people could see these British new romantic bands like the Flock of Seagulls, the Human League, Japan. Oh my God, look at those boys. Duran Duran. Culture Club with Boy George. And then these British looks were picked up by American artists like Cyndi Lauper, Prince, and of course Madonna, who is, obviously, our style icon. Madonna was not a fashion innovator at all. What she did, she picked up on what the other young people were wearing on the streets of New York, which is where she started her career, obviously. She'd dress exactly the same way as kids in St. Mark's Place, which is where everybody hung out. She would just dress the way that they dressed. The difference was that she made music videos where she wore this stuff, which meant that kids in Iowa could see what the kids in St. Mark's Place were wearing and then assimilate those looks. What was great about Madonna is that she changed her look so constantly that she kept reinventing fashion, but all of her looks she picked up from the street. She was kind of incredible in a way. She was a great fashion communicator, not an innovator, a communicator. But when it comes to 80s style icons, we have to give someone else honorable mention. Boy George, we'll just perch him there on Madonna's pointy boob in her Jean-Paul Gaultier bustier. You may think, no way did kids want to dress like Boy George. They did. Believe me, they did. Yet no matter how viewed or how imitated Madonna may have been, she doesn't come close to our next style icon of the 80s. This woman, Diana Spencer, who would of course go on to be Her Royal Highness Princess Diana, the Princess of Wales. An extraordinary woman in every sense. The first time the world got a glimpse of the girl who was going to marry the most eligible bachelor in the world, Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, it was in this picture. She was working as a nanny. Now, don't be deceived by this. She was an aristocrat, but she was working as a nanny. And this picture was taken of her with these two kids she was looking after, wearing this diaphanous skirt, showing these incredible legs. So already from the very first picture, we knew that this girl was going to have a fashion impact. She got engaged to Prince Charles. Here they are at Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace or somewhere, having their official engagement picture taken. And that blue suit she's wearing with that blouse with the kitten bow was knocked off immediately, as was her haircut. The die cut, it was known as. When she married, she wore a dress by a husband and wife design team called the Emanuels that was so excessive, so overblown. Look at the train of this dress, but believe it or not, some critics said, it's a little bit minimalist, could have been a bit fancier. That really speaks, doesn't it, to the obsession with excess in the 80s. She had a very distinctive fashion style. Sometimes she looked silly, sometimes she looked beautiful, like here. It was colorful, it was bold. She really caused fashion headlines. Whenever she appeared in public, whatever she wore was discussed, dissected, critiqued by the media. This was one of her more daring fashion ideas. She took a very expensive emerald necklace and turned it into a trendy 80s headband. But people really did want to look like her. Dazzling Di's beauty secrets and how they can work for you. The Lady Diana look. You mightn't ever be a queen, but at least you can dress like one. And people really did want to look like her. I'll prove it to you. Look at those girls, all with their Princess Di haircut. As you all know, Diana was killed in a car crash. Or was she? I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and I think there's more to this story than meets the eye. And even those of us who were anti-royalists, like myself, when the news came through that she had been killed, this was in the 90s, in 1997, everyone was completely moved and upset. I cried, to be honest with you, because I felt like I'd grown up with Diana. The news was international. Look at this, the Orlando Sentinel. Their headline was "Diana is dead." Kensington Palace, where she lived after her death, was a sea of flowers. Everything you see in white there are flowers left for Diana. I was living in Paris at the time, but weirdly, I was in England on a trend spotting mission. And I went to Kensington Palace and saw this for myself. It was really very moving. For all of her dramatics, she was a very good woman, I think. She raised awareness about landmines by walking amongst the landmines. And of course, it was Diana, the first high-profile person to physically hold and touch and kiss people with AIDS, like this adorable little girl here. It's quite moving, isn't it? I'm getting a bit choked up now. So Diana, she is a style icon, I think, who is really worth celebrating. All right, designers of the decade, excess, excess, excess. Let's group them. Versace. Christian Lacroix, who said he invented this ridiculous outfit, the bubble skirt, but in fact it was Vivienne Westwood who actually invented the bubble skirt. And of course the 80s is when Lagerfeld took over Chanel and absolutely put it back on the map as the luxury label. But these two are far more interesting to talk about. Rei Kawakubo and Yohji Yamamoto. They were Japanese deconstructivists. Take a look at this. They did oversized, they did strange tailoring. Rei Kawakubo is the head of Comme des Garçons, which I'm sure you have heard of. This is Yamamoto. You can see it's kind of ripped, it's kind of deconstructed, but it's black. Thanks to the Japanese invasion, as it was known, the idea of wearing black, imagine they were doing this in a decade that was obsessed with color. It was so exciting and so cool, and thanks to them, the idea of wearing all black equaled rock and roll, it equaled cool, it equaled going against the mainstream. They often worked with very odd textile ideas, odd shapes, odd silhouettes. Obviously, this didn't work. Nobody wore this. But everybody, and that includes you and I, have absorbed through the decades the Yamamoto and Rei Kawakubo idea of black minimalism equaling cool chic. They are important. You really need to know about them. But other people picked up on them as well. This is Issey Miyake, one of his pleats, pleated garments. Totally influenced, though, by the strange shapes and all black aesthetic of Rei Kawakubo and Yohji Yamamoto. So the concept of luxury dawns in the 80s. Of course, luxury fashion, luxury labels, Armani, Chanel, luxury watches, Rolex. Ooh, you're a yuppie, you've got to have a Rolex. Luxury chocolates. Godiva had been around for years, but it was in the 80s where, ooh, everybody had to have Godiva. It was luxury. Which of course meant luxury denim. This really started in the very late 70s with Calvin Klein jeans. Look at that. That's Brooke Shields in a very famous ad campaign. It had a television commercial that went with it. That was outrageous because Brooke Shields says in the TV commercial, "Nothing comes between me and my Calvins." That can be read two ways, right? It means that, her Calvin Klein jeans are the most important thing to her, that nothing will come between them, but it could also imply that she's not wearing underwear. That caused a scandal. Luxury denim. This is Gloria Vanderbilt. She had a luxury denim range that were popular amongst shapely girls. You may not have heard of Gloria Vanderbilt, but I'm sure you have heard of her son, Anderson Cooper. Jordache, of course. Ooh, Jordache jeans. It's unbelievable to think that Jordache was ever considered luxury, but it was. It was kind of the low end of this idea of luxury denim. But this all meant that denim would become a big story in the 80s. Stonewashed denim. Look at this, lashings of denim. And it's big, isn't it? Another fashion craze of the 80s was inspired by physicality. Let's get physical. That was a big hit by Olivia Newton-John, who you see here wearing exercise leggings and leg warmers. There was also an interest in dance because, of course, that was part of this whole physical thing with aerobics and jogging. Movies like Flashdance, Dirty Dancing, Footloose, and Fame. This meant that people were getting interested in their bodies. Jane Fonda's workout book was the biggest selling book of the 80s. And of course this would parlay into fashion. Sometimes it worked well with sort of dancers wrap-around exercise skirts worn with leggings and boots and a sweater. That was the chic end of it. But then there was the not-so-chic end of it. Here you see the miniskirt, part of the 60s revival. Oh, big, colourful leg warmers. Hey, that's what dancers wear, right? And of course, what else do dancers wear? Leg warmers. This is why leg warmers were such a trend. And the headband? The 80s headband. Well, of course, you wear a headband when you exercise, don't you? So all of these physical activities and interests, dancing, aerobics, jogging, they all parlayed into a fashion trend. Doesn't everything? The cultural hotspot of the 80s was a place that absolutely tied in with the obsession with glamour. Miami. Bands like Miami Sound Machine came out of Miami and were very popular. The hottest movie, the sexy movie of the era, Body Heat, was set in Miami. The Golden Girls were set in Miami, the 80s most popular sitcom. And of course, Miami Vice. Which brings us, obviously, to our next style icon of the 80s. Don Johnson, the star of Miami Vice. I cannot tell you what a fashion influence he was, or rather his wardrobe was. Miami Vice was a glamorous cop show. Take a look at this, and take a look at this. Don Johnson's wardrobe in Miami Vice, Armani suits. I don't know what the Miami PD are paying their cops, but obviously enough to wear Armani. In pastel colors, mauves, pale pinks. Men didn't wear mauve, they didn't wear pale pink. Oh, they sure did after Miami Vice. And Don Johnson always had this stubble as well. He kicked off a huge trend in the 80s for pastels, and also pushing the sleeves of a jacket up. Oh my God, every guy did that. Here is another great, and look how huge that suit is. That is another wonderful Armani suit worn by Don Johnson in these lovely pastel colors. And here is a recent fashion image, a fashion layout that is paying homage to Don Johnson with his pastel suit and his shades and his floppy hair. I like floppy hair. Here is another fashion image, obviously inspired by Miami Vice. And sometimes women's wear is too. We can't leave the 80s without talking about hip-hop. I don't think I need to tell you about hip-hop, but just as a refresher, it came out of the inner cities and, in the case of New York, the boroughs in the very late 70s and then the 80s. Hip-hop was the musical element, hip-hop and rap. Graffiti was the visual element, and the fashion element of all of this is actually the longest lasting fashion trend of the 20th century. This. Sportswear worn as streetwear, Nike, Adidas, Fred Perry, lots of gold chains. This was revolutionary. It was cool. It was different. I'm not going on and on about it because I know you all know this style, because so many of us have taken elements from it and still wear them. Hands up. How many of you don't own a hoodie? We all own hoodies. How many of you don't own sweatpants? We all own sweatpants. This all comes from this scene, the hip-hop rap graffiti scene, with this massive fashion tie-in. Well, apart from hip-hop, Vivienne Westwood and Don Johnson, I like him. I think the 80s was probably the worst fashion decade, and yet we are constantly seeing a revival of the worst. Here are some recent runway that draw exclusively from the 80s, especially this one. It's kind of fun though, isn't it? 1989. The decade ended with two events that would really shape the following decade. One was terrible. One was good. The image on the left is from Tiananmen Square. Tiananmen Square is in Beijing. There was a peaceful protest. The government brought in the military, who killed an awful lot of innocent people. You see that little guy there? He wasn't killed then and there. Who knows what happened to him? We don't really know who he was. He bravely walked in front of the tanks to stop them. The image on the right is the fall of the Berlin Wall. This was a happy event. It meant the Cold War had ended, and these two events together made us kind of pull our colourful socks up and think, hang on, we're better than all of this. Greed is good? No, it's not. Let's change our ways and be better people in the 90s. So that was the 80s. And everything I told you really, truly happened. And I should know, 'cause I was there, in fuchsia.